organic is not dead, and organic is very much alive and very much very important in terms of how we can move forward.
I am calling today's episode What's on Heather's Mind? And for those of you who may not know, Heather Cohen is our VP of Media here at Eisenberg, and she's going to be our guest today because, frankly, I always like to check in with her. And we are in the midst of bracing for a sea of change in media and in response to the ways that people's consumption habits are changing. So as a creative director, even though she would accuse me of not caring, I always like to check in with Heather and say, what are you hearing, girl? What the hell is happening? So
Hell.
Checking in with Heather Cohen. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be with my favorite creative. This doesn't go out too far, does it? Uh-oh.
Yeah, no one else will see it. No other creative.
No one else will see it. It'll be fine. No, thank you. It seems like everybody's been dealing with all these questions that have been occupying their minds. And, there's all this uncertainty and all of this change that's happening. And I know a lot of our clients are asking, like, well, what the hell do I do? What should I be doing? Should I be going into social media? Should I be doing more display? Should I just give up and crawl underneath my makeshift desk? What should I do? And I think a lot of clients are concerned with trying not to try to sound too tone deaf during this time.
Right.
And they're like, well, how do I protect myself in case like everything goes like one complete other direction?
Yeah.
And I think the other thing too that I've also heard, and this all just happened in the last week, these are just all questions I've heard, and it's top of mind for me, is that I think a lot of clients, a lot of advertisers, even a lot of vendors are just kind of overwhelmed by all the things that are happening out there.
I know I am.
I know.
I guess I don't count as a client.
There's a lot of news out there, right? And people just heard like the news that was released last week where they're like, oh my God, the gross domestic product, like I don't even know what that means, but it sounds really bad that it's down like by 32%. And all I know is I've heard that it's like on the same level as depression. And they're like,
worse, right?
Well, yeah. And they're like, what the hell do I do with this? And they see that, the entire sectors have been decimated, right? Travel, hospitality, entertainment has entirely changed.
But yeah, it's a tough time, right? I mean, like, I think that you're right. For some of us in advertising, obviously we have to wrestle with the question too of like, so the gross domestic product goes down by this incredibly large margin, 30%. And that means that there are less goods, right? That there are less goods in the system. We're making less stuff. And so does that mean that we'll advertise less?
Yeah, and that usually means, and so that usually is a relationship back to how much you're doing in advertising. And so the projected spend, I believe, for this year is around minus 10%. Because everybody has been kind of shifting their dollars from television to digital, which is not a new trend, right? This has been happening slowly but surely for the last, really the last 2 decades.
But still, isn't it? But it's been, I imagine you're going to take us there in a second, but it's, definitely been accelerated,
Yes.
right? Like I think we've been focusing on, for sure that mainstream television buy is becoming less and less relevant slowly. But it was still like if you had the money and you were trying to make a big awareness play, that's where you would go, right? That was the place to break through. So that's changing.
Yeah, but I think now because of COVID, everything's kind of been accelerated. right? There's this whole thing about hyper trends. And what we would normally see, because again, the shift to digital has been a gradual one, we would see things that were always like about 5 to 10% in terms of like, as the decrease in television, and then it would move 5 to 10% higher in digital. But what we've seen in the last few months is that it's now exponential. Instead of seeing like these little 5% swings, we're actually seeing 25%, 30%. You're seeing a decline in television and out of home that's closer to 50%, something that we
Wow.
haven't seen. And, the media spend makes sense because it's always trying to align to prioritizing to those younger audiences, right? I think we used to call it on the movie side of things, when you turn 35, they used to put a little grave marker on your desk and say,
Harsh.
"I'm sorry, you don't matter anymore." And I'm like, wow, thanks.
But yeah,
But
young people's consumption habits are definitely landing more squarely in digital, but the whole world is following them, right?
yeah, yeah. And so that's where everybody's shift, on top of that, between it's not just Gen Z and it's not just millennials, but now, this whole shift in COVID-19 has really led to immediate changes that have really transformed the everyday life. And so whether, as we were talking about earlier, like entertainment has entirely changed its model, and you've now shifted to where people are streaming first run movies at home. Obviously, we're in this new workplace. Here we are talking to each other on Skype. I think while there's all this technology, there's also this yearning for returning back to a simpler time, as it were. And I think where we get a lot of perspective is when you think about the other thing that has been occupying a lot of the news outside of COVID is Black Lives Matter. And looking at it's been an interesting pivot because there's this whole new thing where everybody's talking about CSR, or corporate social responsibility. And when you talk about Gen Z and you talk about millennials and even about our own generation, Gen X, one of the most important things to just kind of our sensibility is about having brands and aligning to brands that also reflect our own personal value set. I checked out this webinar last week that was by Social Bakers, which is one of our many social listening partners. And they showed something that was kind of interesting to me. And they were talking about the whole Blackout Tuesday thing that happened on June 2nd. And they showed a chart that was kind of interesting, which showed everything, right? From Asia to North America to Western Europe. And you looked at all the numbers and they all kind of looked about the same. But then when you looked at North America specifically, you saw that you had a dip, which is on June 2nd, which is when everybody was supposed to basically remove themselves from social media.
So this is
Um,
media spend dips
yeah, so
down.
media spend dropped down, and and so everybody's spend, they paused just for that day. And then immediately right after, it just shot right back up, and it actually went higher than where it was during in November and December during the holiday timeframe. And it actually sometimes exceeded a little bit higher than that. And the way I almost always try to look for a step forward, I always like to take a step. This doesn't sound quite right, but almost like taking a step back and just looking at history, right? Because we know that history tends to repeat itself. And when I talk to a lot of our clients, they're asking me as they're trying to deal with these uncertain times, and they're like, which part of history are we going to be on? Are we going to see a repeat of like 1968, or are we going to see something where we hopefully have a new enlightenment period, right?
Your clients are asking, how do I know what to do in this space, right? In this time.
And how do I stay on the right side of things? And, understanding that for them, Gen Z and millennials are very important. And the thing that we always keep repeating about is that you really have to have an authentic voice. And you think about somebody like Taylor Swift, you think about how she pivoted herself from a country teen darling to now being kind of like a very grown-up superstar. And one of my teenage nieces and nephews, they reminded me of like, well, Taylor's been doing this since 2015, Heather, since back in the day. And I'm like, okay, first of all, don't call 2015 back in the day, but they had talked about how Apple streaming, it's like, she always, the reason why she resonates and the reason why she's not seen as being too cheesy is that she actually stands for something.
Yeah.
And when she took a stand against Apple, where she started off, I guess something that was like, to Apple, love Taylor. She's like, we don't ask you for free iPhones. Please don't ask for free music. It's interesting how she's kind of reinvented herself. And it's the same with a lot of really successful artists, right? So it got me thinking about like, okay, about empathy, curiosity seems to be driving a lot of what people are doing at home. And it just reminded me of a book that I actually didn't pay that much attention to that came out last year. It was called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. And they were just talking about how this idea of curiosity is kind of like a way to help not only drive creativity, but it was also a way of trying to feel some sort of connection. And there was a study that came out by Cigna, and they talked about how 71% of social media users felt lonely.
Yeah.
And they talked about, and it talked about all these other things where people are like, well, it just seems like everything's so anonymous, and there's a yearning for like having one-to-one conversations, which has actually led to now doctors doing a lot of Zoom calls, right? And doing a lot of
Yeah.
medical, right? There's been, again, these are hyper trends that you never thought you would ever actually get the medical community to do Zoom calls with their patients, but now they have.
Yeah, it was happening. It was happening within like 2 or 3 weeks,
Yeah,
after the COVID
yeah.
started. Yeah.
No, it's so true though, right? And so again, one of these little hyper trends that, where you were going to think that you're going to have to be like dragging everybody kicking and screaming to it, they eventually moved over. And it just got me to thinking about, well, okay, so what does the future hold? There's a need for corporate social responsibility. I think there needs to be not just accountability for corporate America, but I think there also needs to be accountability for the users as well. As much as you look for people like Mark Zuckerberg to solve everything, it will also probably be something where the individual will also
Sure.
help move things forward. And so it will be about advertisers and I think audiences working together.
Yeah. That's a great insight.
My other theory is just kind of going into this whole idea of tactile marketing because I heard this podcast the other day from Sherry Turkle, one of my favorite authors, and she said, all the time in the world to be with our machines, as she was explaining with COVID, we're going to see people yearn for the embrace of a human. And, it got me thinking again, there was all the stats, even before COVID came out, about how people were lonely. And, there's been a huge shift in discussion about mental health. And, this, I think, because people like yourself, right? You're very gregarious. You want to go out there. You want to see people. You also want to touch people. I'm the same way. There's something to be said about just seeing another human and talking to another human face to face. Not that this isn't lovely. Not that your
Yeah.
face on a computer screen isn't lovely, but it's missing something.
No, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there too. Like really practically speaking, getting in my feed. I'm sure this isn't exactly what you're referring to, but like, when you say that, it reminds me that I'm seeing these things for like new experiences where there's a company bringing a movie watching experience to Los Angeles that I think tried out in Paris, where you actually are in little boats, so that it creates separation between you, but you have people, and since you're with people that you're normally with in your boat, you don't have to have masks, and you can see that those kind of innovative solutions to how we stay connected are going to be a new market, a new
Yeah.
opportunity.
Well, and you see it at here in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl. They converted it into a huge drive-in, and so they've been having sellout things for drive-ins. And last weekend was what, a drag race, which was
Yeah,
interesting. It was very
that sounds
sad.
cool.
But
How
I think
about
there's
like I'm gonna say it here first. What about a COVID pillow? It's kind of like a maternity pillow, but it's like, just a whole full body like
like a full
pillow.
body pillow.
Like, yeah, like a body pillow. Like they're gonna make a huge comeback, because I can be
It's
with it.
true.
I'll
You just have a
I'll bring it
body
here on the
pillow.
show.
I just want to feel somebody. I just want to feel another body.
So what else? What else does the future hold?
As I was thinking, kind of percolating, and then I'll hush up. Is
Never.
is that, as we were talking about earlier about what, right, about curiosity and just thinking about like having that honest conversation, and how there's a real need to go to the return of empathy. And, somebody had posed to me that they're like, gosh, Heather, well, isn't organic just dead? Because isn't all social media just a pay to play? And I have to admit, probably pre-COVID, I would have been like, yeah, you don't exist without me. You don't exist without paid media, which is actually a very cavalier and wrong attitude, by the way. I was wrong about that. And I think there's going to be a huge implication to companies as it relates to their customer relationship management, to their CRM, and just making sure that those dialogue, those touch points, like they spend a lot of extra time with that, and just making sure that any of the dialogue that's happening on those owned channels, I think part of this whole movement with the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, is going to really have to resonate on that. And so I
Yeah.
think as with that's where I'm going to say that organic is not dead, and organic is very much alive and very much very important in terms of how we can move forward.
Well, and when you say that, even before it got all muddied with all your crazy paid below the line media, um, organic always really rested on genuinely great content, right? Like that's how how
Sure.
social media was built. It was content that we cared about, and so when you think about the premium that Gen Z places on authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
especially coming out of this COVID and Black Lives Matter response to George Floyd's death and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Authenticity is the new. I mean, it's not new, but like it is the authenticity is king, right?
Right.
You can't even
Good.
say that because it's already gendered, right?
Right.
Authenticity is queen,
Queen.
the queen
Well, let
matriarch,
us say it's
and
paramount. It's
yeah,
very
paramount,
important.
yeah.
It's very paramount. And
And so it makes sense that that would resonate most inside, or resonate a lot inside of great organic social channels.
right. When we come out of this whole period right now, a lot of advertisers are paused, right, on Facebook and Instagram. One of the things, and I still haven't figured out the answer to, is like when we unpause and we come out of it, what's our message? What are we going to try to say? Because one of the things that I recommend to all clients, don't just turn yourself back on like, oh, okay, we're back on Facebook now, da, 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 da. Because that's what had happened after Blackout Tuesday. And a lot of brands came under criticism for it. And so I
Yeah.
think there's a lesson to be learned from that, to make sure that when brands do come out of the, trying to say like, okay, Facebook, Instagram, like stop the hate, and coming out of that boycott, that you also are reigning true and what you are, in terms of your business plans and how you go about things too.
And what
So
your core values are, right?
what your core values are. It's all about your core values. Maybe that's what this episode should be called, your core values.
Your core values. Hey, wonderful to have you. What a great show. It's a totally new format you brought. Not only did you bring the goods of what's on Heather Cohen's mind, but you introduced a new format, which I suspect is going to make great content and play quite well organically.
Well, there you go.
So thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Listen In. You'll always find us streaming on LinkedIn, along with live chat comments from myself and guests. After the stream is over, we archive the show here on our LinkedIn page for Eisenberg, and you'll also find the episodes at AListDaily.com. So have a great week, and as always, keep your ears on.